and we're going to take a look at the synergies between the northern pastoral industry and live exports from multiple angles. We're delighted to have experienced ABC journalist Kristy O'Brien to facilitate this next session. Many of you will be familiar with Kristy's work on Landline and other TV programs. Earlier this year, she was named National Rural Press Club Journalist of the Year and won an Australian Council of Agricultural Journalists Star Prize for Rural Broadcasting. So, well, congratulations, Kristy. Yeah, we should give her a round of applause for that. So, welcome to the stage, and I'll leave it to Kristy to introduce our panel members, Paul Holmes of Court, Travis Robinson and Tony Gooden. Please come up, people.
Thank you so much for that. I believe some of these blokes will need no introduction, but as we say, we'll give you a little of a spiel anyway. So we've got Paul Holmes of Court from Heytesbury Cattle Company. Many of you will be familiar with the significant reach that has across the Northern Territory and Kimberley. 6 stations, including the famous VRD, which I've had the privilege to visit, Carbine Park, a recent acquisition as well, and also considerable interest obviously in Willard and AACO. We've also got Tony Gooden, who is from Frontier International, 40 years experience in ag, very passionate advocate for the sector, I would say, and also since Frontier's inception, 1.5 million cattle exported, 1 million alone to Indonesia, so a significant player obviously in that space. We also have our final guest. Turn the page. Travis Robertson is the West Australian Chair of the Australian-Indonesia Business Council and sits on its national board. They've obviously played a significant role over 4 decades in the business and trade relationship between our two nations. He's also the Chief Operating Officer at Australian Capital Equity, where his portfolio includes extensive pastoral operations along the Gibb River Road in the Kimberley. Also some pretty spectacular country up there, I bet you don't mind visiting. So we'll get into it. I think we'll start with obviously the elephant in the room, which has been all the talk, I guess, over this way, as many of you know, and that is how shaky is the industry feeling in the wake of what has happened with sheep in the export space, and where is confidence sitting, I suppose, in the industry? Might start right down the end with Paul.
Thanks, Kristy. Confidence in the live export industry for cattle for us is quite high. We're investing, continuing to invest in it, not just when it comes to properties and our herd and growing that, but also we've 6 years ago we invested in a live export ship, so we've got a livestock vessel, so we're very comfortable with that. We feel it's quite secure. We take the various governments and what they say about live exports of cattle, we take them at their word, and we think also just the fundamentals are so strong, the integration between, particularly in the north, and just how critical that integration is between the north and businesses like Raymond's and Richards in the Philippines and through Indonesia and others. We think we think it's quite secure. Probably maybe talk about it after these guys have had their say, but I think some of the threats are more from within the industry, and whether we can keep the investment going in some of the long-term assets that are required to sustain the industry, around shipping and around other infrastructure that facilitates the industry. I think that's critical. So I think the risks are, and they're not just external risks, they're more what's in the room and within the industry. But maybe, Tony,
yeah, I was going to say, we'll come back to that because that is an interesting point, but I want to get your views firstly on that and where you think confidence is sitting.
Thank you, Kirsty, and thanks. Welcome to everyone being on the panel. It's great. Yeah, look, I'm reservedly confident about the future of the industry. I think the economic and the demand and supply driven case for the trade is very compelling, and the interdependency between the two countries and Southeast Asia in general for that matter, but particularly Indonesia being, I think it's the world's biggest market for importing cattle. It's a very natural business, and it's very important to Australia, and it's very important to Indonesia. Our government has stated that it's a critical trade. I think it's well run by professional people that's matured a lot, I believe, in the last 10 years, particularly the last 5. I think it's well regulated. So I think we can be reasonably confident. However, from a big picture, I guess the decision to cancel the sheep trade, obviously that's shaken the confidence of institutional investors. So we have to face up to that, and I think as an industry we need to ensure that there's unequivocal support from the government so that we can have long-term investment and really maximise this business for the benefit of all the stakeholders.
Travis, I guess you're saying with your role with the Indonesian government and that insider aspect, I suppose, how do you feel things are going, and from their side as well?
Ya, before I answer that, can you indulge me for 1 minute? Selamat pagi semua, kepada semua teman-teman saya dari Indonesia, selamat datang. Saya senang sekali kalian bisa datang ke Perth pada pagi ini. Absolutely, no, sure. I mean, relationships are everything, right? And I think everyone in this room that's had any dealings with Indonesia will understand that this is far more than a pure commercial play. I think from a government perspective, and I know sheep were discussed heavily yesterday, and I think there would be an understanding that sheep and cattle in the government size are two very different things, both from a policy perspective, but also politically. And I think the political piece is something that needs to be remembered. Whether you agree or you don't, it was a political play. So I think they are two different issues. I think, like has been said previously, this isn't just an economic thing. This is about a strategic partnership with our closest neighbour. And so, perhaps that wasn't as well understood in previous years when actions had been taken by the federal government. I think that is clearly understood. And if you look at the steps that the federal government in particular is making to strengthen that relationship with Indonesia, in particular, as a business, but also as an association, we are very bullish about the future of live export into Indonesia in particular.
You say that you're feeling confident in the government. I do sense some reservations there, but I would be curious to hear your thoughts on where you think that policy pressure is, though. Particularly, I would say those inner city voters. Is that pressure as strong as it has been in recent years, or do you feel there is some ebbing off of that? And how much is it influencing things?
I mean, I'll start. I mean, obviously you see that pressure coming out, particularly Melbourne, Sydney, maybe places like Fremantle. But again, out of sight, out of mind, right? And I think actually when you speak to the average person on the street and you talk about the difference between sheep and cattle, I think they do see a difference. You talk about, and again, I'm not saying right or wrongly, but the arguments are, the time that it takes to go from Broome, Darwin to Java to South Sumatra versus the Gulf states, different, the size of the beast, there's a whole range of different factors. But yeah, I think the thing that we really need to be mindful of, and I mean, Alec is great as doing this, is the death by 1,000 cuts through regulation, right? And I think if there's any risk to the industry, it is through that over-regulation, where people who have an agenda will get their pound of flesh.
Definitely.
Use the pun.
It's another way into it, isn't it, to kind of cripple it. Any thoughts on that?
I think generally my view is that the special interest groups get a disproportionate amount of
media
and cover and influence on the trade, which is doesn't replicate mainstream Australia's view. I've got a lot of friends who are radiologists or barristers or professions totally unrelated to what I do, and when you sit and have a mature discussion about what we do, and everyone in the room knows the attributes of the trade, they totally get it straight away, but it's a lot of misinformation and unfortunately sections of the media that misrepresent poorly and inaccurately do tremendous damage, not just to this industry, to many industries in this country. And it's a very, very sad shame. But when you have the chance to have the proper discussion, mature discussion, people get it straight away. So I think it's one of the challenges of the industry is to manage the narrative as best we can.
I think there's always going to be the crazies at the extreme, and they can be very vocal, they can be very influential, and politically they can be a problem, and we can't ignore that. But the grown-ups in the middle, if you like, are the ones that we need to continue to have a conversation with. And I think when the industry is under attack, there's a tendency to think that, okay, our challenge is to combat these crazies. And the crazies that are always going to be there. They're just ignorant. Some of them are ignorant, some of them are motivated. There are some evil forces amongst them. There are some just well-meaning, ignorant people. There's all different people in that sort of end of the spectrum. But in the middle, Australia is full of sensible people, and they're mostly grown-ups, and we need to make sure we're tailoring our education and information and the narrative to them as well, because they're the people that have our back when something bad happens. If you go back to 2011, that's what happened. There was some very, very vocal opponents who got very excited, managed to suspend the trade for a period, and it wasn't that we suddenly convinced them that they were wrong. It was that the middle, the sane grown-ups in the middle, started saying, oh, wait a minute, maybe this is a bit more complicated than we thought. And that's when the political winds shifted, and it was quickly reopened and the like. So we need to keep that in mind and continue to talk to them.
I guess the human face helps too in that change in that narrative too. Putting faces to the story is always a strong attribute in your favour. I want to talk about something else though, in regards to perhaps the communication is better out there in terms of the differences and the economic benefits and whatnot about the trade. However, and Paul, you and I talked about this a little bit a few days ago, are we missing a trick when it comes to, within our sector, and I specifically talk about the cattle sector there, recognising the benefits of the live trade and in fact the disadvantages if we don't have it, and what suddenly 1 million cattle looks like coming into the domestic trade?
I'm so glad you asked that question. I was worried that we wouldn't get to it, and I think I think we are as a live export industry, I think we do slightly miss a trick in that we're often talking to ourselves about how good the industry is, where we talk about it in the context of North Australia and how important it is for North Australia. We talk about relationships with key overseas diplomatic relationships like Indonesia, which is absolutely, all those things are absolutely right, they're absolutely critical. But I think there's a wider Australian beef sector where even within that, I don't think our industry is as well understood as it ought to be. And I think we're missing a trick in not engaging more with the wider Australian beef sector for them to understand how our industry plays into them. You said 1 million head, so I don't know what the numbers are less than that at the moment, but they have been up to 1 million head of cattle leaving the country in 1 year. So you just think what happens to the Australian beef producers, the whole beef sector, if 1 million head that are being produced in country that, it's the best and highest use of that northern country that's going to produce cattle no matter what the market is. That's what's going to happen. They're not going to stop. So, it might be 800,000, 1 million, whatever. That many head will stay in Australia. The first thing they will all do is they will get on trucks. Dave will be pleased about that, but they'll head towards, in the direction of Dalby and Naracoorte and Ushea, and then the prices in those sale yards will crash. The cattle that would have gone there will then shuffle south and head towards Wagga and Dubbo, and the prices there will crash. The cattle that would have gone there will go further south. They'll be in Albury and whatnot in Victoria. The price there will crash. Even cattle from Tasmania where most of a large portion of their weaners get on boats and go up to Victoria. They won't do that. They'll stay in Tasmania, and they'll crash. So you would have beef producers right through the entire country, including the ones in Hobart and around Hobart. They would see their market destroyed if this happened. And I think there's a bit of a tendency for the wider beef sector to think that because our industry has LiveCorp and ALEC and there are levies being paid here and they're being spent on this thing, well, they think, okay, well, you guys are all right. You guys are taken care of. That's your job. You've got your money for that. But in fact, as producers, we're putting millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars into levies, into an industry bodies, and I don't think that those organisations quite appreciate how important our industry is, and I think they should support it more than they do.
Not getting the pound of flesh potentially for those levies.
No, that's right. That's right. I'll tell you a funny story. Sorry, then I'll pass to you. Back when the cattle transaction levy was being reviewed last time, went from $3.50 to $5, and Don McDonald had the job to go around to all the producers and persuade them to support the increase. When he came to me, and a lovely guy, but I had to break the news to him that at that time, we as one company, we paid more in the cattle transaction levy, just us, than MLA spent in total on supporting the live trade. And then when questioned about it, it never occurred to him that would be something that should happen, and pushed further. It's like, well, isn't that what LiveCorp's for? And it's like, well, that's a total misunderstanding. So MLA and a lot of that money could do more, and I think as this industry here, the live export industry, should be doing more to push for a wider understanding in the Australian beef sector of the importance of our industry for all producers, and in doing so we would have wider political influence and we would have wider influence on MLA to direct giant pots of money our way.
I feel you have something to add to that.
Thank you. Well, I feel like I can speak with some knowledge on this. I spent the first part of my career in the industry in the Western Districts of Victoria and the southeast of South Australia, where I knew the cattle market reasonably well. And just to support what Paul said, I think it was 2019, in fact, I think, if I'm not incorrect, the number of cattle exported from Australia was 1.2 million in 2019, 1.2 million. And I distinctly remember, obviously it was before we've had this demise of the US herd and this massive demand we've got for manufacturing beef from Australia right at this moment. But I distinctly remember that the supply chain was so clogged with cattle at that time, and this is when producers, and a lot of people have short memories, this can change very dramatically quickly, and that's the nature of Australia. But the producers didn't have the feed, they could not hold the cattle, and there was Brahman cows, high-grade Brahman cows in the north of Gulf country in Queensland that were no commercial value. Abattoirs didn't want them, they were not worth trucking. So they either died or got shot. And that's not long ago. So if you suddenly took those 1.2 million cattle and pushed them on, that would be the biggest animal welfare disaster, far greater than anything else we can imagine. So it's real.
Yeah. Travis, do you have any insights on that?
No, what you said.
So I'm not touching it. I think we did talk about that in relation to MLA, and we're not picking on MLA. I know they're in the room. But does that mean that there has been a shortfall specifically in R&D when it comes to the north and live exports, do you think? No one.
I'm not sure about R&D, but I think from what I observe often, and we're not here to criticise, we want constructive. What I've seen too much of is that Australia wants to apply our values on the importing nations. So the fact, and Raymond mentioned it earlier, most Filipinos want fresh meat. Indonesians want fresh meat,
Yeah.
warm meat. Doesn't matter what we want, that's what they want. And I think there's been an underlying feeling within MLA and the Australian parts of the Australian industry that that the market will change, it will mature, and they'll want chilled meat. I've been in it 20 years going to it has not changed.
Yeah.
You know, the amount of box meat doesn't move the needle in Australia. So we have to be aware of what our customers want and acutely aware, and that's what the live cattle industry facilitates.
Yeah, because it's a counter argument every time. It's we'll just do boxed beef, you know.
Well, that was one of the reasons when the federal government shut the sheep trade. One of the reasons is, oh, we want to keep the jobs in Australia. Oh, sorry, Australians don't want to do that job.
No.
Yeah, and obviously in the north, you can't just switch to processing here. North Australia is the way I put it to people who are outside the industry and don't understand, I make it really simple. I say, in the north, we're very good at starting cattle, but we can't finish cattle. And, you know, you need to be able to finish it to make the processing work. And that's why there is a number of mothballed, failed abattoirs around the north, you know, over the last 100 years. That's why it's just very, very hard. It's not economical to finish them there. But as far as, you know, MLA, the R&D, some of the work they do is really good, and they've got to keep doing that. But I think there's just you can never do too much work to deepen the relationships, the working relationships with. We keep on talking about Indonesia. Travis is here, but it's the same with obviously the work that Spencer's been doing with Raymond and Richard up there. You just can't do too much of that work. Deepening that relationship, so at every single level, getting them here, getting us there, technical exchange, working up through the various departments, in every applicable department. There's probably half a dozen of them. So yeah, that sort of work, you just can't do too much of that.
On that note, there has been this big push by the Indonesian government, and you might have some thoughts on this with the lunch program, a school program. There's been a lot of talk about the implications for the dairy industry in that space, but do you think the beef sector is set to benefit from that as well? I mean, it's a very ambitious target that's set.
Well, and I guess this is the real opportunity and the real challenge for Australia and for the Indonesian government. You know, you've got a very ambitious president in President Prabowo, who has a very ambitious agenda. He's been waiting a long time to be president. Now he's got his chance. He's keen to, and the school lunch program is one of the key, tenets that he took into the campaign. He's also, I mean, the other thing I think that people miss is that he's also got an incredibly ambitious target for growth, for economic growth generally, for the economy. And so then what does that do, you know, to national GDP? What does that do to the buying power of the everyday, Indonesian in Indonesia? So, and I guess the other piece to remember is that, we were talking before about the difference between pork and beef in the Philippines. You know, there's this concept, that developing countries, as they move up the spectrum, they eat more. That is incorrect. They eat differently.
Yeah.
And so, you will have somebody in an Indonesian village in the middle of Java who has nothing, who will eat rice and vegetables every day. The quantity is the same. When that family gets a little bit more money, they'll start eating maybe some tofu or tempeh, and then they'll move to chicken, or fish, and then chicken, and then beef. And so remembering as Indonesia's economy grows and expands, so will the demand for beef. Obviously, it's a very different beef. You think about the types of dishes that they cook in Indonesia, the rendongs, the soups, very different from what we eat here, but the demand will increase nonetheless. And I think that will absolutely play into the President's school lunch program. They've got problems with dairy and how they grow their dairy herd. Milk in Indo or in the tropics.
I've seen attempts. It's not pretty. Yeah.
While as an association, we get a lot of interest. We want dairy cows. We want dairy cows. There's still probably a realisation piece that has to happen there. But absolutely, we're talking 80 million school lunches a day.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. And so, how that happens, absolutely the Australian live export industry has a role to play there.
Yeah. Just while I've got you on the processing, I know we've talked about the mothballed facilities, and there's some sort of well-known ones, but particularly up your way, there's been a restart of that abattoir a few times over the years. Is it unrealistic? Are we ever going to see processing a company in live export? I'm not saying singularly, but is there ever going to be a market for that?
I don't know. I mean, maybe you should ask the Indonesians.
Sure. Okay. I only asked you because your stations are right there.
Yeah, our stations are right there, and our stations, I mean, it's been transformative for the Kimberley, right?
Yeah, sure.
And that's what we're talking about. The ability for the Kimberley to process cattle which weren't able to be sent to Indonesia has been transformational for a lot of stations in the Kimberley, and I mean, we've had Mount House Station for 10 years now. When we took that on board, the herd is in a very different state because of what we've invested in it, but also in the ability through the Kimberley Meatworks to move cattle out of that herd that wouldn't go to Indonesia. So there is a role. What that role is going forward, we wait with bated breath.
I think we discussed this last week, Paul, as well, and we were talking about just the need for, I suppose, the right numbers when it comes to these facilities, and that being the important aspect. Any thoughts on that?
Well, history dictates that the prospects of running an abattoir in Northern Australia are very challenging with the seasonality of the supply, labour. I mean, I think, I don't want to criticise what anyone's doing with an abattoir, but you've got to look at it, at the end of the day, water finds a level, economics will dictate. And the fact is, right now in Australia, whether we like it or not, unfortunately, labour cost and energy cost are not favourable.
Yeah.
Whereas Indonesia, 4.5 days on a shipment from Darwin or Broome to Jakarta. We've got a massive population. Their energy costs probably 1/10 of ours. Their labour costs maybe 1/20. There's a real opportunity for Indonesia. I could actually see a vision of a lot more cattle going to Indonesia, get value added, processed there in modern supply chains, and then perhaps re-exported to other Muslim countries around the world. Something that wouldn't be out of the question. And I mean, look what happens with our iron ore, our gas, coal. It gets taken to Asia and value added on a much cheaper energy and labour base.
Yeah.
Could easily happen for Indonesia. Very predictable.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think with the abattoirs, there's definitely a role there if done well, and it can coexist with live exports, but it's a bit of a niche operation across the market and needs to be scaled appropriately. And I think the scale is key. You think about just the way our operations work. We're producing, the most efficient thing for us to produce are feeder steers and feeder heifers, and the most efficient path for them is to go, thanks to people like Tony, onto a boat to Asian neighbours and be grown out and processed there. But we're always going to have some other cattle in our production system which do get fat without having to be fed. So cull cows, cull bulls, some of the spade heifers, whatever, they may have, you could build a business around having those there. And as Trevor said, there's a huge benefit genetically for the northern herds to be able to have a really good way to turn off those cows and to make genetic changes faster. So I think if people were to orient a northern processing facility around those cattle that are naturally produced and available, and when they become available, then it could definitely work and could definitely compete, and would be great for everyone if it happens. But if they try and scale it up to a level where they want the entire north to reorient their production system to make it look like a different part of the world, it won't work. No. It just won't. So that's their challenge.
I want to ask about that confidence in the sector in relation to investment. It's been a significant amount of time since we've seen a new boat commissioned. Is that sort of indicative of maybe where we're at with that long-term forecast? I'm picking on you, yeah.
Oh,
I
look,
figure you're the expert in that space.
Yeah, I think definitely it would have to be a consideration. I think there's a few components to that, but for someone to enter into perhaps spending $40 or $50 million on a boat, they'd want to be pretty confident that they've got a 20-year lifespan. And the fact of the matter is, to keep ships maintained to Australian Maritime Safety Authority standard is the highest in the world. So we've seen recently some vessels depart Australia to service the rest of the world, and that has reduced the shipping capacity. There's been not an investment in a purpose-built or even a conversion, really a significant investment for some time since the Vroon company built their G-class ships, which was, I'm not sure now, the latest one might have been 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah.
So even if someone said tomorrow, I'm going to build one, it's probably 3 or 4 years before it would be coming into service. And right at the moment, for our company, the choke point is lack of shipping infrastructure, so in terms of volume. And it's a little scary if we get that drought situation. The herd's arguably somewhere around 30 plus million. It's biased towards Northern Australia. Northern Australia's had 2, 3, 4 good wet seasons. You only have to look at the history of Australia. I hate to say it, but sooner or later it's going to stop raining.
Yeah,
and if the choke point's going to be shipping capacity, because these guys will buy as many as we can get if the price drops $1 a kilo. But if we can't ship them, what happens? So, yeah, I think that's part of getting the unequivocal stated support of the industry from the Australian government. And I think Australia, the timing's really good. Australia and Indonesia have just signed the security pact recently with Prabowo here.
Yep.
I understand Albanese's going to Jakarta in January.
Okay.
I really hope that Mr. Prabowo stresses to Mr. Albanese that please don't jeopardise this trade, because we culturally and protein nutritionally rely on it. And then people will invest.
Yeah.
Because at the moment, we've even got issues with the major banks. Some insurance companies not necessarily want to support this trade, which is really appalling.
Yeah, just on that shipping point, you're absolutely right, Tony. It's that confidence about the long term. So these ships will have, it might take 2 or 3 years to build one, from design to launching it, and then they have a life of 25 to 30 years. So you've got an asset of that length of time. So if you go, just imagine any asset that's going to cost $50 million to build, and you go to a bank and you say, this is a long-term asset, I'd like some long-term finance. And they'll say, okay, great, well, do you have any off-take agreements? And you say, well, I'm hoping to have one by the time we launch. Oh yeah, and how long will that go for? A month or 2, maybe 3 months, for a 25-year asset with to finance that. So the risk there is that with uncertainty about the industry and uncertainty about the regulatory regime, is it going to just keep on being chip, or is it going to be kept stable for a period? Without that sort of certainty and stability, then new ships won't be commissioned, and unless someone is willing to take a very, very big risk and a big punt on it, and commit a lot of equity capital to it. And there aren't many people who would be willing to do that. And if that's the case, well, then the industry doesn't have to worry about the government banning it. It has to worry about it just running out of the infrastructure we need to do it. And it would be an industry that fizzles out rather than gets shut down. So we need that stability, certainty, consistency of support for the industry and of consistent regulatory environment. Then the investment will come, and then the industry will continue to grow. But it's got to be in that order.
A thing that just keeps popping into my mind is we just need to be better at telling our story, right? And this is, we are not the only industry that, when you talk to people in Melbourne and Sydney, they kind of look at you like you've got, 2 heads. I married a Sydney girl. When you talk to, her family about the virtues of the mining industry in Western Australia, they're like, what are you talking about? You're desecrating and pillaging the earth. But I think we as an industry, we talk about all of these risks, but in there also lies an opportunity to tell our story better. You know, whether it's from, you know, the value that we bring to the north, whether it's economic, whether it's, you know, geopolitical, strategic value, we have to be better. And you've seen the mining industry do it, right? You know, especially here in Western Australia, they've been able to craft a narrative that explains the value of the industry to the nation. And so whether we're, as a sub-industry or as a subgroup in an industry, are talking to the rest of ag nationally, or even just the nation more broadly, we need to be better at telling our story and why we matter. Sorry.
I agree with that, and what I will say that I've observed is there is a tendency to put the head down, and I know each of you have, you know, big companies where you've got stations that probably media want access at times, and there is a distrust of the media, obviously. I can accept reasons for that. Thank you. But, you know, I have to say, it getting that story out there and putting those young faces or human faces, I can't stress how much that value is, you know. So I agree, but I think, do you think it requires a bit of bravery too to own live export? You know, that's the other thing. Like, there's this sort of tinge of kind of shame or the cattle industry separating itself from live export, which there's no reason to do that. You know, is it getting better at really embracing and saying we are live export? You know.
So you talk about bravery, and I know a lot of you here are from the Kimberley, and I see Bron as well from KBCA. I mean, you show me a more braver person than somebody working on a station along the Gibb River Road, right? I mean, you talk about bravery, and again, right, you know, we talk about, you know, animal welfare again, you know, and I'm a pen pusher, right? You know, I work here in West Perth. I'm privileged enough to go up to the Kimberley, you know, 5 or 6 times a year. Never, you know, whenever I go, never have I seen a group of people who care more about animals and animal welfare than the staff on our stations. And I'll say that to anyone and everyone every day of the week. And so, yeah, you know, there are, you know, things that happen. I get that. That's in every industry. But we absolutely should wear, you know, with a badge of pride and honour that we are, you know, a legitimate business making a legitimate contribution to the economy and to the international market more broadly. So, yeah, you're welcome anytime.
I think that's a good point, Kirsty, and Andrew made the point yesterday. As an industry, we should be brave, and I think it's a noble industry we do. Of course, we do it for commercial reasons, but at the end of the day, you can go to bed at night or tell your kids you've helped provide food. Yeah. And I think Mark put a picture up yesterday of a young Indonesian schoolgirl having a meal, and that, you know, to me that hit a nerve for me. And I think you're right. I think the industry can be much better at, as I said, explaining the narrative. And you know, it's a very mature supply chain. There's some great relationships right the way through, and we've just got to get a bit better at prosecuting that.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. People need to be informed, so they're equipped with the facts to repel ignorant attacks. We need to be confident in how we tell it, and we need to be proud of what we're doing. Yeah, we're doing God's work.
Yeah, good. Just finally, because I know there's some people who are probably interested in this, genetics are a discussion that often get brought up in the north in relation to what's best, where we should be headed. Do you have any thoughts on, you know, is it Brahman continually, or we're seeing AOCO put more Wagyu into their genetics? Where do you think that sits, or is the demand just always probably going to be that Brahman from Indo? Yourself?
I'll let Tony will be the most informed because he's right there in the middle, brokering the transactions between producers and the market, and we'll have a good feel for that. But look, for us, we find a high indicus content in our herd is the best match to the country and the environment that we're operating in. We acknowledge that there are some customers and some markets where the style of beef is not to their taste, but we're in a really fortunate position that it seems to be that high indicus content is what's best for our country and our environment, and seems to also be what our customers want. So I can't see any reason why we would want to change that. It'd only be if we had a different customer. We decided we want to chase a different customer, but because we're not doing that, there's no need for us to change. But a lot of people have, and you'll have a sense of that, Tony.
Yeah, well, I'll just state up front, I'm not a production expert at all. I've got a small farm and run a few cattle, but I'm no expert. But I think, and I don't really care if we're selling pink cattle with, blue spots. If that's what the customer wants, that's what we're trying to supply. And the customers overwhelmingly want high Bos Indicus cattle, and the Brahman fits that pretty well. And there's a lot of commercial reasons, which most of people close to the trade know. And I think I'm not sure about the Kimberley, but in Northern Australia, definitely when this trade was suspended in 211 for 6 weeks, I think that made a lot of producers think, wow.
Hedge our bets,
Yeah, well, if we have to head south, they don't really want high-grade Brahman cattle, not necessarily. And I think the other driver has been fertility, from what I hear, is an issue. But whether that's real or perceived, I don't know. I'm not an expert, but I know the market wants high-grade, good quality, preferably pure Brahman cattle. That's the truth.
Yeah,
Travis.
I mean, exactly the same. I had dinner with some of our biggest buyers on Monday night here in Perth, and they said exactly the same.
Yeah.
They said, "What are you doing?" So we do Brahman. They said, "Good. Don't mess around with it. Just high quality Brahman." So again, right, it's just business 101. What does the customer want? Well, that's what you get. Yeah, okay. If you want to, put a bit of an insurance policy in there somewhere, yeah, okay. But for us personally, we aim for 100% Brahman herd.
Yeah. If it ain't broke. The other aspect we've seen is a bit of a drop-off in Vietnam, China, various reasons. But do you think there's enough work being done in that space? I know Indonesia's kind of your expertise with sitting on the board, but do you think there is some more opportunity that we're missing in those other nations?
Yeah, well, again, right, and I think it's business 101. Yes, Indonesia is our strongest market and has been for decades. But Asia is a lot bigger than just Indonesia, right? I mean, we've literally just heard, from great opportunities in the Philippines and some of the great work that's being done out there. Yeah. So I think while a lot of the rhetoric and focus is on Indonesia, Southeast Asia in particular, why wouldn't we go, out to the world? And again, right, you think of Australia as a brand, we are seen as a great brand internationally. Yeah, so why wouldn't our product be sought in other markets? It's just about finding those key partners and those people who are, good to work with and establishing those relationships.
Anything to add?
Yeah, well, we provide cattle with 5 different countries we have, but principally, once again, our economics drive it. In 2019, that year I told you 1.2 million, 300,000 cattle went to Vietnam that year. This year, probably lucky to be 60 or 70,000 because it's just price sensitive. Whether we like it or not, we're dealing with developing nations. Yeah. They literally only have so much money to spend on food, the consumer. So, once again, the economics will dictate. Yeah. But the market's there. If the price is right, the cattle will go there, no problem. I'm sure if there was a protocol between Australia and the US right now, we'd see ships with southern cattle going to the US. Yeah. I'm sure of it. So the market fundamental, basic demand is very good. It's just really what happens with the price, and that's, we can't control that. No. We try, but we can't.
I'll get to that in a second. If there are any questions, just jump up, because I am conscious of leaving them right to the end and running out of time. But on that note, we've got this balancing act between importers and exporters and the price. But I think it was yourself and I, Travis, were talking about the fact that those importers will just collapse. If of course there is getting the price for the producer and that importance, but is there a little bit of perhaps a lack of understanding of how fragile that situation is within country?
Again, and this is a conversation I had earlier in the week, right? And my owner, we love high cattle prices, as probably everyone in this room does. But also the understanding, again, that was mentioned just a second ago, is we are dealing with incredibly price-sensitive markets. And again, the products that we are sending into Indonesia are not the products that wealthy Indonesians are eating in a steakhouse in the middle of Jakarta, right? These are products that are going into wet markets, predominantly in Java, Sumatra a little bit as well, that are being turned into, rendang and other dishes that you can buy for, kind of 20,000 rupiah, so, call it $2, right? So that's really what we're doing, right? So, if I'm a an old, ibu, selling rendang at my warung, for $2, a meal, well then, my input costs, yeah, it's got to make sense, right? And so, and we've seen, kind of traders, enter the market, in Indonesia, when it suits them, they come and make their money and then they're gone again. So yeah, I think just keeping that in mind, but also making sure that we're partnering with the right people in country, those people who are proven, who have been there for a long time and will be there during the ups and the downs.
Have we got a question over this way?
Yeah. We can do about another 2 questions.
Sure.
Hi, Kate Bishop from the Livestock Collective. I was moderating the Livestock Collective social pages during the last 12 months during all the government announcements.
Lucky you.
And I can tell you that the average person thinks that the live cattle export and the sheep export is the same thing. My question to you guys is, have we done enough to survive the next big crisis event? Because it's not a question of if, it's when.
Well, that's some disturbing thinking. Hearing that, it's quite disturbing. But
I don't know. Look, I hope so. I really do hope so. And you're suggesting we haven't done enough because people are seeing them as the same thing, and therefore they, are going to come after us the way they went after sheep. So, yeah, I don't know whether the people who are on your social media, responding to your social media posts represent normal Australians. It may be that those people who made that effort to do it feel good about themselves, but to jump on there and say something negative, and the people who should be our supporters aren't really inclined to jump on and write a positive thing. So, yeah, we just have to look for friends wherever we can and build those friendships. And the point about the wider beef sector, and to Middle Australia, to the sane grown-ups that make up Middle Australia, and inform them and get them as supporters, because if there is another problem down the track, they're the people who we're going to turn to for support.
Well, we can take one more question, and then we must wind it up in the interest of time. Thank you. So, is there another question?
Right out front.
One right in front.
That clock ticking's making me nervous as a former newsreader, going, we're over.
Right, thank you. Steve Maguire from WA Farmers. You made the comment about the government says we should, kill local. Well, in WA, we've gone from 12 million sheep to, where's Kate? Less than 8 probably next year, maybe. Live export's taking 500,000, but we've lost 3 million out of the system, 4 million out of the system. So there's not more jobs in abattoirs if you do that, because our livestock systems across Australia produce a range of products that need to go into a range of markets, domestic, export markets and live. So the message I think we've got to sell to government, and the government didn't want to listen to this, they just didn't want to, they didn't understand, they didn't want to understand, that we need the aspects of the industry to work to make livestock in Australia work. You can't just want to just pick off sections as they go. They want to knock us off bit by bit by bit. The message is we need everyone, and everyone has to support everyone to make our system work, because that's the way it is in Australia. Don't compare us to, high intensive operations in Europe, and don't come to us with animal welfare aspects, because we've seen what they do in Europe and it's no better than us. There might be different systems, but it's not better. So that's the message we've got to sell at a higher level, is that we need every aspect to make the system work, because that's how Australian livestock works. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks to our panellists, Paul, Travis and Tony. We really appreciate your insights and being here today.
Thank you very much, Kristy. Thank you, Travis. Thank you.